Welcome to Module 1 of my film photography course, where we are covering all the fundamentals of shooting film. Today, we will be talking about film cameras and where to purchase them. If you are new here, I'm Sammy. I've been shooting film photography for over 10 years, and now I am taking all of the information, tips, and tricks that I've learned during my journey and sharing it with you. Let's first talk about film cameras because to shoot film, you must first have a really good camera to do it with. Now, just a warning, this is not an exhaustive list of all the film cameras in the world. There are so many different brands of cameras out there. So I really wanted to just hone in on the few that I love with my entire heart. The ones that I use all the time and are always in my bag and that I know like the back of my hand. Also, I won't be covering any instant cameras within this list as I am going to dedicate a whole separate video for those because I have way too many that I want to talk about. Okay, so let's jump into film cameras. We will start with 35mm cameras first, as I feel they are perfect for photographers who are new to film. In addition, 35mm cameras also tend to be more accessible regarding purchasing and how much they cost. And I really like them because you get 36 images per film roll as opposed to the 16 that you get with medium format. So in my humble opinion, if you're an absolute beginner, a 35mm camera is the best way to dip your toes into the world of film photography. Let's start talking about the Pentax A3000. This camera has been my baby for ever since I owned it the past several years. It has followed me everywhere, and about 98% of my personal images that you'll see online were shot with this little camera. I first stumbled on this camera at a yard sale. It was in a big bag with several other lenses, and it was just sitting on a table patiently waiting for me to scoop it up and save it from a lifetime of collecting dust. I ended up buying this camera and 3 other lenses to go with it, all for a whopping $30. The Pentax A3000 was released in 1984 and features a K mount for its lenses. It weighs 18.7 ounces and takes 2 AA batteries, which is a really huge bonus in my eyes because a lot of film cameras sometimes can use like obscure batteries, and some are batteries that they don't even make anymore. So it's really nice to know that this camera just uses camera batteries that you can just find anywhere in your house. When I purchased this camera, it came with a Pentax A lens and has stayed on my camera 100% of the time. It's my personal favorite. I really love it, and I think it is very universal for, whatever need that you have. And right now, you can typically find this camera used on eBay for around $100 after shipping. Loading 35mm film into this camera is super easy. Once you put the film roll into the camera's film chamber, you line the film into the sprockets, close the back, press the shutter button, and let the camera do the rest. With this camera, you need to manually rewind the film back into its canister when you finish shooting it. It can be confusing since it automatically winds the film at the beginning of the roll. There have been many times where I thought I was shooting a fully automatic film camera and got confused when it wouldn't roll the film up at the end of the roll. The Pentax A3000's primary shooting mode is Aperture Priority AE mode. This is just fancy talk for once you've set the film's ISO and the aperture on the lens, your camera will automatically find the correct shutter speed for proper exposure. I love this camera mode because it makes shooting fast-paced images really effortless. In my case, it also makes shooting a group of rowdy children really easy too. This is a fantastic film camera for beginners and seasoned film photographers alike. It's light, easy to hold, inexpensive, and creates really, really beautiful images. 10 out of 10 recommend. Let's talk about the Canon AE-1. The Canon AE-1 is my OG film camera. It's a lot like the Pentax A3000, but completely manual. It's a classic camera, and I feel like many film lovers either own this camera or have used it at some point. So the Canon AE-1 camera is a 35mm SLR film camera with a Canon FD lens mount. The camera only has manual focusing and a manual lever for winding film. It uses a 4SR 446 volt battery and has a shutter speed of up to 1,000. The Canon AE-1 feels sturdier than other film cameras I own, coming in around 1.3 pounds. You can feel like how heavy it is and how sturdy it is when you're holding it in your hand. The actual body of the camera is easy to hold and light enough to wear around your neck, making it a great beginner camera to have while you travel. While I own a few lenses for this camera, I really prefer the 50mm 1.8 FD lens. It's the one that I use the most and I really love. The Canon AE-1 was popular when it first came out, selling over 5.7 million units. Because of its popularity, it's a relatively inexpensive camera that is easy to find nowadays. I've seen listings on eBay for around $200. This is an excellent film camera for film beginners as it's inexpensive, easy to find, and super easy to take with you on your travels. Okay, but last but not least in the 35mm category is the Canon 1V. If you already are a photographer and you shoot with a Canon DSLR, the Canon 1V might just be the perfect camera to help you get started with film because you can use all your Canon family EF lenses with this camera body. You don't have to pay extra for special lenses, which is a huge pro in my book, especially if you're starting out on a budget. My favorite way to use this camera was at weddings when I needed to take a lot of images quickly, such as family portraits or ceremonies. The Canon 1V is a 35mm SLR film camera. The Canon 1V has a 45-point AF area and 3 focusing modes, one-shot AF, AI servo AF, and manual. The 1V is a full-frame camera with a picture size of 24mm by 36mm and has an ISO film speed range of up to 6400. The Canon 1V takes 12VR5 lithium battery and can be paired with a AE-1 battery grip that takes 4 AA batteries for vertical shooting. Currently, you can find this camera for around $600 on eBay. The camera is built on the heavier side. It weighs in around 2 pounds for just the body. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot of weight, but when you're holding a camera for an extended amount of time, it tends to take a toll on your arm and your wrist, especially if you're like me and you have like tiny baby hands that are really short. This camera takes images fast and the loading and unloading are really quick, making the camera the perfect addition for weddings, especially times that are really important like the ceremony. All you must do is pop in the roll of film, shut the back, and let the camera do its own thing. The autofocusing is really quick for an SLR camera too. The only real complaint about this camera is that you should use an external light meter while shooting. I found that the internal light meter within this camera isn't always the most reliable, and I've personally have been burned with underexposed images a few times. Overall, this camera is an excellent addition to anyone's camera family. If you're in the market for a sturdy and relatively fast 35mm SLR, definitely give this camera a go. Okay, let's jump into medium format cameras. Now, we are going to be talking about my absolute true love when it comes to medium format, and that is the Pentax 645N. Most avid film photographers have probably used or at least heard of the Pentax 45N, mostly because it's a better financial option than the Contax 645. The Pentax 645N is a medium format SLR camera with autofocus, creating a 6 by 4.5 format images. The camera most commonly uses a 75mm 2.8 lens and is compatible with other Pentax 645 lenses and backs. In addition, this camera uses a shutter speed knob ranging from 4 seconds to 1/1000th of a second and has an LCD viewfinder that showcases the shutter speed, the aperture, and the focus indicator. It also has a self-timer function as well as a multiple shot or multiple exposure switch. The Pentax 645N uses 120 roll film, which is 16 exposures, or 220 roll film, which is 32 exposures. And the film is loaded onto an interchangeable film holder. It requires 6 AA batteries that will allow you to shoot around 130 rolls of 120 film or 100 rolls of 220 film. Currently, you can find the camera body with the 75mm lens for around $600 to $700 used. It also has a tremendous internal light meter. I rarely have to use an external light meter when using this camera, as the internal meter does a really great job. Having an excellent internal light meter is a huge time saver, especially if you're shooting a wedding where you need to move and shoot constantly. And lastly, it utilizes battery life really, really well. I've gone through an entire wedding and still had plenty of battery life left afterwards. The only downside to this camera is the loading and unloading of film. It's a bit of a learning curve and it can get tricky the first couple of times you try to do it. The film holder will always have an empty film spool into which you'll weave your film so the camera can unload it from its current spool onto the new one. If you're using this camera during an important event like a wedding, I highly recommend having a different back that is always loaded with film for moments when you can't take the time to unload and reload your film. So this camera is really weirdly shaped and it's heavy, which makes it weird to hold or have around your neck. But personally, the odd shape and heaviness is a very small price to pay for the gorgeous images that it produces. So overall, if you are ready to jump into medium format film, this camera is an excellent addition to any photographer's bag. All right, let's talk about the Yashica Mat 124G. I got this little beauty a few years ago as a Valentine's Day gift from my husband, and it is clearly one of my favorites. The Yashica Mat captures square images that are around 6 centimeters or about 2.36 inches, and a typical roll of 120 film will give you 12 square images. The lens on the front of the camera is 80 millimeters and gives beautiful and crisp images. When I put pictures from the Yashica side by side with photos from my Pentax, I can't tell them apart regarding image quality. And currently, you can find this camera pre-owned for around $300 on shops like eBay and Etsy. The Mat 124G does have a light meter. A little yellow arrow moves from left to right at the camera's top. It does a pretty decent job, but I always suggest using an external light meter when you're in doubt. There is a small metal hook on either side of the camera, so using a neck strap is super easy, and it's something I really recommend, especially if you plan on using the flip-top viewfinder. When holding the camera on the left side, you have a dial for focusing your images, and on the right side, you have a lever for advancing your film and the image counter and ISO dial. For loading film into the Yashica Mat, this camera works pretty similar to most medium format cameras I've found. You can use both 120 or 220 film with this camera, and loading it into the camera is quite simple. First, twist the dial on the bottom of the camera to pop open the back. Next, load the film at the bottom of the camera by pulling the knob to the left, inserting your film, and then let go of the knob. Then, thread your film into the empty spool at the top of the open back. Crank the film winder until the arrow on your film roll lines up with the green arrow near the bottom of the camera. If you're shooting 220 film, you'll match the arrow on your roll of film to the red arrow on the camera. One of the most excellent parts of the Yashica Mat is that you can see the images you are about to take from the top. Instead of a typical viewfinder, it has one, but you can also use the flip-top waist-level viewfinder to see your picture. It's why I bought the camera. I'm just going to be honest, and I love it. However, there is a learning curve of using a waist level viewfinder. It can be really difficult to position your camera for photos. Every movement you make and what you see in front of you will be reversed in the viewfinder. So if you move left, everything that you're seeing will move right in the viewfinder. So it can be a bit challenging when taking and framing pictures. I have been known to look at the the top viewfinder and then just keep shifting back and forth until I can figure out exactly where I want to take my picture. Overall, this is such a terrific camera to add to your collection. It gives such a unique shooting experience at a really reasonable price point. Plus, it doesn't look too shabby when it's sitting on a shelf in between shoots. Now let's jump into a few of the best places to buy a film camera. Because most analog cameras are discontinued, you have to purchase them secondhand. And because you need to buy these cameras secondhand, it's really important to make sure that you are purchasing them from a trusted source. You don't want to risk purchasing a broken camera and then wasting your money. First up is KEH. So KEH is a professional camera gear reseller. They purchase cameras, refurbish them, and sell them for around 40% less than their retail price. So if you want to be 100% sure that your camera is going to work, it is a great place to buy one. Often they sell the camera body and lenses separately, however, so be aware that you're going to need to buy both. There are a few downsides that I have found to this place. They don't always have a great inventory of film cameras in their shops, and I wouldn't recommend selling to this company when you have a used camera that you want to get rid of. I found that you don't get a really good deal financially, and it would be much better if you sell secondhand on eBay or Etsy. I've sold cameras to them before, and I've gotten burned by getting only like 30 or 40% of what the camera was actually worth. eBay and Etsy are great places to purchase and buy secondhand cameras. All you have to do is head to their website and search for whatever camera you are considering. And then when browsing, pay attention to the seller's reviews and the details of the camera listing. I have purchased many film cameras from both websites and haven't ever run into an issue before. It is one of my preferred ways of buying. Also, selling is an excellent option on both eBay and Etsy because you get to decide the buying price and can directly communicate with potential buyers. And last but not least is your local garage sale. I found that this route of purchasing is cheaper, but it is riskier. You get the bonus of physically looking at a camera in person and checking it out, but you also have to take the owner's word on whether it works. Unfortunately, there have been a few cameras that I've bought from a yard sale that ended up not working when I brought them back home, and they've basically have just become, items that sit on a shelf like a knickknack. But buying a camera from a yard sale is really great because it's always a good bang for your buck. So even if there's a risk of the camera not working, you're usually not paying enough for it to be worthy of not wanting to buy the camera. So for example, my Pentax A3000, one of my favorite cameras, was found at a local yard sale. And there you have it, my friends. Now you have the rundown on all of my personal favorite film cameras. Once again, I am so happy that you are interested in film, and I hope you are excited to continue learning with me. Thank you so much for sticking with me, and I will see you in the next lesson.